Today we're talking Dune. 1984, David Lynch's seminal film.
It's a very special day, very special episode. It's kind of like a special-sode because
Mini-sode.
Yeah, I decided originally I was going to do a combination of we were going to record Dune now, and then we were going to record the new Dune later, and then I was going to put them together as one episode. But no,
Power of
I'm going
cinema.
to try to get this Dune 1984 one up immediately, as soon as possible. So, because Dune, the new Dune is coming out tonight.
It'll be out. It'll be out.
I got the
on
notification.
HBO Max.
I got the notification from HBO Max. It's out. You could watch it now, technically.
Well, hold on. We have to mention split take. General consensus is if you watch Dune on HBO Max on your TV, you're a fucking weenie.
You are, of course, more than welcome to do both. But
No.
The theater experience, yes, you are. The theater experience is the priority. You have to do that. But once you've done that,
okay.
you can
You're right.
return
You're
to
right.
the film.
Apologize. You're only a half weenie.
Look, I'm still a little frightened of movie theaters, so there's no.
That's fair. I'm not.
real
I would like to reiterate. I'm not typically a theater elitist, but in certain cases,
I think most cases, maybe not for most cases for movies, not new releases. The theater experience is very important.
yeah.
For new releases, it is hit or miss.
But for big movies like Dune,
Yeah, but even so, like last night, a little side tangent, I watched Possession, which was on at the Loft here in Tucson, and I am so happy I got to watch that in the theater, because if I was watching at home, I would probably be pausing it every once in a while on my phone, and not like zoned in completely to the movie.
Yeah.
And even though it's not like this huge grand epic like Dune, it was so perfect to just be forced to sit there and watch those images stream into my mind. What an interesting movie, but we'll talk about that later.
Yeah.
In a different format, because we're talking about Dune, and I don't want to get sidetracked yet again. 1984, David Lynch made Dune. This was after a long odyssey with Alejandro Jodorowsky, who was originally slated to make a Dune adaptation. There is perhaps a conversation to be had about that whole fun.
I didn't read Dune, but I have a friend who said it was fantastic.
Saga of cinema. It's one of the great lost movies, if you want to call it. But that's neither here nor there, because it was never made, and the rights eventually found their way into a producer's hand who said, David Lynch. They saw The Elephant Man, of all things. I don't understand why this was the thought process. They saw Elephant Man, like, this person is perfect to direct a sci-fi epic like Dune.
Do you think it had anything to do with Eraserhead? Maybe.
No, David Lynch actually said he didn't want them to watch Eraserhead because he thought they would rescind the offer. So,
oh no, it's funny because
I
the
mean,
Elephant Man becomes
Eraser.
the guild master in Dune 1984, or the guild, whatever. What the fuck is called?
Eraserhead. I would have given David Lynch Dune. I think Eraserhead is the much more interesting through line.
I agree.
The Elephant Man, I don't see any connection as to why that would qualify him for
such
Dune.
a tame movie, but yeah.
So David Lynch was a relatively new director at the time. He had directed his first movie,
just two.
Eraserhead, and then of course Elephant Man, which I am always delighted to know that Mel Brooks produced that for him.
Yeah,
and it makes me warm and fuzzy because I don't know if you've heard any of the stories, but Mel Brooks fought tooth and nail. Yeah.
Yes.
But during the production and during the studio who wanted to cut it down, Mel Brooks was very much an advocate for David Lynch.
Which is just, it's pure. It's cute.
Yes, it's so wonderful. And then Dune was thrown into David Lynch's lap, and he had never read the book before. Someone told him it was good, which is interestingly enough the same way Jodorowsky was approached for the project. He had never read it before, but someone told him it was good.
That is interesting.
And David Lynch made Dune.
Dino De Laurentiis presents Dune, a world beyond your experience. your imagination.
Starring Kyle MacLachlan and a bunch of other people.
But a bunch of David Lynch regulars. Well, I don't know about regulars, but
and David Lynch
Dean
himself.
Stockwell.
Briefly.
Oh yeah, that was odd. That was very odd.
I always forget he's in that one scene, and I like
Literally
3/4 of the way through, I'm like, wait a second. Oh,
well, it's one of those
there you
things
are.
where you see him and he doesn't really look like David Lynch, but then you hear him and you're like, oh, it's David.
No. So I've seen David Lynch's Dune before, and this is Chandler's first time watching, and we're going to give kind of our preliminary thoughts on the film, a little review. Obviously, we're going to be spoiling the plot of Dune, given that it is a book that is quite old at this point. It has had many adaptations, but of course, spoilers for the David Lynch adaptation are equally spoilers for the Denis Villeneuve adaptation.
Yeah.
So we will be getting into that a little bit. I should hope you are familiar with the story of Dune. I highly recommend reading the book. No. This was addressed to the audience, Chandler.
Okay.
Can't you see I'm looking at the audience now, not
That's
at you?
True. You're right.
It's the same.
I apologize.
It's the same.
Hey, I goofed.
Thanks.
Well,
Anyway, so I'm gonna throw it over to you, let you talk, and let me. What would you think of it? Because this was your first time.
So obviously, this movie has a bit of a reputation. It has a reputation for being awful.
I did not say this. I am not here. I understand.
But to me, it wasn't the kind of like baffling awful that I thought it was going to be. It was just mostly boring. And the thing is, I followed it because I read the book. But about halfway through the movie, I realized, okay, I know what's happening because obviously I've read it. But I'm putting myself in the headspace of somebody who has never read the book, has never heard the book, just happened upon this movie because it looked cool. And this movie makes no fucking sense. Like it does a very poor job at translating the book's immense, dense story into a compact cinematic experience. It felt the only thing that is comparable to this movie to me, and maybe I'm reaching, it felt like a precursor to the prequels.
Yeah,
I get a lot of prequel vibes to this movie.
I think specifically, I would say my biggest, like, just general thought on the film is that it's so bursting with creative energy. The design and the world and everything, so much thought was put into that very clearly. And yet it's all towards the service of a story that is, for the most part, expositional and is
very expositional,
very Deus Ex Machina based narrative storytelling. But yeah, it's fascinating. It's the storytelling that's the way that the various, granted, hard to film elements of the book are put on the screen that are weird. And granted, the design is weird too. Like, it is a wildly designed thing, but it is, at the very least, that's the film's strongest suit. How crazy and how imaginative.
It's interesting. It is interesting. There's a lot going on production design wise. There's a lot going on in the costumes, both good and bad. There's some really good special effects and there's some fucking awful special effects. I think one of the worst special effects I've seen is the shields that they look so bad. It looks so bad. And the thing is too, like, obviously Dune is a very dense book. I am still, to this day, I don't know if I like the book or not. I like it and I don't like it. I don't know. But a lot of what's in the book just simply can't fit into a 2-hour movie. I think one of the biggest things to me is just characters that are interesting in the book, but I guess they feel the need to throw them into the story, despite the fact that a lot of them don't have much to do in, a 2-hour runtime, like Duncan, Idaho.
Yeah, he just kind of
Why is he in this?
Disappears, reappears.
Yeah.
It's
Stilgar, it's just...
Well, I think these characters have a place in the narrative of the book, and it's not translated.
I agree.
I think you're right. A lot of the characters beyond the Harkonnens, the main Harkonnens, and beyond Paul, are just kind of left by the wayside. They are the real casualties of this adaptation.
Yeah.
In that I was really thinking to myself about like halfway through the book. No, it's actually more like 1/3 of the way through the book and halfway through this movie. We lose about half of the characters we've been following for the most part.
Yeah.
And I was thinking after that, do I remember any of them? Do I care about any of them? Because they should theoretically serve a narrative impact and have a weight on the story going forward.
Yeah.
As a motivation, particularly Paul's father, who barely gets any screen time, and any of the screen time that's there is worthless character-wise.
Well, that's the thing too, is that this is one of the most horribly miscast movies of all time.
Oh, one of my favorite
everywhere.
Shots. The most interesting thing. It's so funny when they're leaving the planet Caladan, and Duke Leto has a pug in his arms.
Why does he have a pug?
It's so funny. It's bad. That's miscasting. They miscast the pug.
Well, that's okay. So as far as the miscasting go, I think Kyle MacLachlan is a fine Paul, not a great Paul.
He's fine.
He's got that boyish look. He's got that, innocence to him.
I think they could have gone younger.
I think the guy who plays the Baron is fucking weird, but I think he's one of the more memorable characters in the movie.
Certainly the most, I think probably the most memorable part of the film.
Yes, I agree. But then the guy who plays the Duke, so boring. Such a boring actor. Even Patrick Stewart, who I love, he's not a good Gurney Halleck. He doesn't have that sort of aged, rugged quality.
Doesn't Max von Sydow appear and then disappear
Max
from
von
the film?
Sydow is in it. I don't
so weird.
What is his name? I thought that was Stilgar. I don't remember his name. But I didn't know Sean Young was in this. I had no idea Sean Young was in this.
Sean Young
It's
from Blade Runner.
So many great actors who I love in so many other things just assembled for the most horribly miscast. But again, Paul's good. The Baron's good. Why the fuck is Sting in this?
There are creative decisions where I'm like, this is the wrong decision, but I am so excited to see this on screen. And one of them is Sting, and because it's funny and it's Sting. And two, when he first enters the film, there's this great guitar riff, like,
oh my god, it's so 80s
guitar thing. It's great. It's not good, but it's so much fun.
But that's the thing. It's bad, but it's fun bad. Well, for the most part. Yeah. But that's the thing, is that there's so many misfiring on all cylinders, but at the same time there is passion for a lot, like the editing. I think those dream sequences, if there's one thing David Lynch knows, it's dream sequences. I think he manages to convey that sort of dread that Paul is feeling in his sleep. I liked the visual of the box thing. Which, again, I've only seen the clip from the trailers. Maybe it's all inferred in the new one. But, Burning Hand is pretty cool. But I think a huge part of why this movie doesn't work for me is that there's a lot of stuff that sounds good on paper. And I mean literally sounds good on paper. As in, like, so many of the fucking terminologies, the slang, the world building of Dune, when you say it out loud, it sounds fucking stupid.
This is a masterclass in how not to do world building, despite having great design.
I'm amazed at how many times they use the term weirding way.
Get back! She has the weirding way.
With the utmost sincerity. It's just so many of these Dune words sound stupid when you say them out loud.
One of my favorite, genuinely, I forgot about it entirely. One of my favorite moments of the whole film. And I don't know if you have this experience, but when I'm watching a bad movie by myself, it's very rare that I will laugh out loud at a bad thing. Whereas, like, if I'm watching that same movie in a group setting, I will be much more likely to respond viscerally to a moment. So it takes a lot to produce a physical reaction of badness. And the one in this movie, as soon as I heard it, I was like, I know I laughed the last time I heard it. It's still funny this time. I think it's the last line in the movie where the little demon child, Paul's sister,
yeah.
she's going like, "He is the Kwisatz Haderach."
Oh, he is the Kwisatz Haderach.
And it's like it explodes and it tries like gibberish, utter gibberish. And it's the last line of the movie. And the way she says it in this like the tiny squeaky demon voice, it's
oh my god. For me, that moment was Stilgar and Paul riding the worm. Because again, it's like there's really good effects, but then you don't remember them because the bad effects are so bad that you wonder how this made it into a multi-million Hollywood movie.
What? Well, I was interested to learn that it was filmed entirely in Mexico, the movie.
Okay.
It's just
it's interesting.
Yeah. And so
dunes.
They probably saved some money that way. But so just from the beginning, the movie starts out wrong. On a few different levels.
Exposition.
Like there's a series of scenes that just leave you with question mark after question mark that will never really be answered. And of course, there is almost too much loyalty to the book.
Way too much.
It is a book that is hard to adapt. And the thing I think that when people say a book's hard to adapt, that means the book by necessity should not be followed closely. Yeah. Because if you do that, you end up with something like Dune, where the opening lines of the film, the voiceover from Princess Irulan, directly lifted off the page. And I noticed multiple times in the film, stuff directly lifted out of the book. And it was, like you said, stuff that works on page, but not in the movie because it's just so terminology laden. And it's not like Lord of the Rings, where they put in they ease you into the world. And then instead of like dumping names and terminology on you, it sprinkled it in here and there. Like Gandalf goes by a couple different names. And you have to be listening because they use them infrequently here and there, but it's never like a point of exposition or it's never emphasized as like, this is important. Whereas every single piece of terminology here is important and part of the story. And so they have to emphasize it, or at the very least, by remaining so close to the book, they have to emphasize it. I think there's a way around that. And I'm curious to see how the new Dune deals with the terminology and exposition.
I almost feel like it needs a title crawl. Title crawl comparatively, like if you compare like a Star Wars title crawl or even like a Blade Runner title crawl to the opening scene of Fellowship of the Ring. Obviously, the Fellowship of the Ring opening is much more cinematic. It's much more creative, but like with so many of those words that just like sound stupid when you say them out loud, maybe just make the audience read a little. But yeah, it literally starts with like exposition, and then it goes to Paul, who gives us more exposition to himself while on a computer. One of the biggest problems I have with this movie is so much stupid voiceover. It's like one thing if the voiceover comes from a consistent character, but one line that made me like laugh out loud is when the Duke, Gurney, Paul, and Max von Sydow are in that ship or whatever. And those workers, those miners almost get eaten by the worm. And Leto is like, very concerned about the miners or whatever. There's a Max von Sydow voiceover who says something along the lines of, he cared more for the miners than the spice. I think I might like this Duke. And I'm like, what? Why?
And like, that doesn't even make sense. This is a good example of something that Lord of the Rings, which is, I think, is a good comparison just in general.
Yes, because they're similar.
That it did right is it often would take lines and actions from one character and transplant them to another character where it makes more narrative sense when they started trimming things down.
Yes.
And I think in this instance, that line isn't necessarily wrong, or at least what they were trying to get at, but it makes no sense directed at the Duke, who is about to die. But it would make so much more sense if that was a moment for Paul to show who he is, what he values.
because that's like really the only scene we get of the Duke doing anything.
Yeah,
And that's
it's,
another thing,
it's,
too.
It's so close to him getting yeeted off of the movie.
I honestly feel like the first thing that happens in the movie is the Duke dies, and that doesn't happen for over an hour into the movie.
It spends a long time on that stuff, and I don't mind it. Like I'm quite excited actually for the new Dune to spend its time building up these characters, and that's,
I agree.
One of the things I really want to see from the new Dune is make me care about Paul's father, make me care about some of these characters we're going to lose, because then that just is good storytelling. And two, that will make it more invested. The second half, which is essentially a revenge plot, it'll make me more invested for the second part.
Yeah. It's just, but I think I'm not gonna say where it drops the ball because it never had the ball to begin with, but where it fucking kicks the dropped ball is the third act, where in the book, obviously, when Paul and Jessica escape, they live with the Fremen for a while, and then over the years they conduct raids on the mining ships. They meet up with Gurney again, and then they plot to take over the Baron or whatever. That all happens in like 2 minutes. We go
there's a montage of sorts.
It's so
the pacing's
montage.
So weird.
Yeah, because like you go from Paul and Jessica meeting Stilgar to then like immediately we get Patrick Stewart in a mullet. And then there's even like a line of voiceover, something on the lines of like, over the next few years, Paul, like, fucked up the mining, the spice thing. But it's just, and then I mean, even in the book, the romance between Paul and Chani is kind of like, it's like assumed but never shown. But like they fucking speed run a romance in this movie.
Yeah, it's not much of the point in the book, but there is more of it because it's a book. And here it's just Paul and Chani, and they see each other. The next scene, then they're off kissing each other.
Yeah.
It's okay, we're done.
But in the book, they hide the fact that they don't build that relationship through that gap, that those 2 or 3 years that we don't get to see. You can assume a lot, but God.
The ultimate irony of all this, and Dune 1984 is a movie I like to say is entirely made up of exposition, or at least as close a film can get. And it's not actually all made up of exposition, but it does seem like even the lines where people are expressing how they feel about something feel expositional, just simply because it's surrounded by and often in service of explaining something. And the big irony here, and I think we've sort of danced around it, is that despite having so much exposition, you really don't understand anything better than when you start it. And you don't come to any greater understanding. You don't come closer to like an emotional connection with anything. And that's just wild to me, how much is explained, how much is talked about, and yet you don't get any closer. And I think that's one of the reasons why I am optimistic about the new one, because I think there is a way
you need
to tell the story where you don't need all this exposition. That's the interesting thing. You don't need to explain all this stuff. And I think the book does a much better job of that, in that this movie starts out interesting in that it doesn't follow the plot of the book exactly. And I'm curious as to why that was the choice. Like, it's interesting how the character of Lady Jessica, Paul's mother, doesn't show up really until 6 scenes into the movie.
Yeah.
And the scene, the scene that we are all aware of, especially if you watch the trailer for the new Dune, or if you know Dune, the What's in the Box trailer, the pain box, that's the first scene in the book, essentially.
Yeah.
You get to that
literally how it opens the book.
Yeah. And I think it's a much more interesting, it's a very small, compact way of starting a very large and grand story. So you don't feel, you feel overwhelmed because obviously there's all these terminology that are being thrown at you, but you don't feel overwhelmed because you're in a small space that you can easily comprehend the internal relationship dynamics. But here you start with the voiceover, the space voiceover of Princess Irulan, and then you go into a completely made up scene for the movie, which I find
With the guild
wonderfully
guy?
strange. No. The navigators go visit the emperor of the universe.
Yeah, that's what I mean. The alien thing.
Oh yeah, and it's
Yes.
one of my
That's a
favorite
fun
pieces
scene.
of Lynch. Yeah, it makes no sense whatsoever in the plot of the movie.
No.
It could be cut out, but I do love the strange, odd visuals of the navigators and him and just
They got the little
large
talk
tube.
box, and they bring this giant toilet in, and then that's the thing is I saw that scene and I thought, okay, maybe I'll actually like this, and then the rest of the movie happened. Because that's the thing is that there are scenes where I'm like, okay, this is genuinely very interesting looking. The effects are good. It's kind of creepy, but then all of the rear screen projection and stuff. I was fucking in tears at the end when the Baron dies and like the way he falls into the worm's mouth. Oh my
It's
god.
so great. Every scene with the Baron is just a treat to watch. Not because it's good, but because it's so funny
He's
having
trying.
this fat corpuscular with his
Boils.
boils, his skin
they're-
condition.
The doctor is like injecting disease into his face.
Doctor's like, I love your disease. They're like getting off on it.
I wonder if in the new one they'll make Stellan Skarsgård fuck boys. That's what he is in the book, right? He's like a, ew. And he kind of gets at that in this
there's
scene. Except instead of
I
sexual
don't know,
intercourse, he just puts blood on him.
it's implied. For some reason, it's never bothered me in the book, but there is this kind of relationship drawn between sickness and homosexuality with the
It definitely
with the Baron,
in this
and
movie. yeah,
it makes me cringe in this movie because it's
really
almost
bad in
as
this movie.
obvious as you can get with subtext.
which is also funny because then you have David Lynch, obviously in like the 90s he was comparatively much more based, and then you have this
yeah.
which is whatever.
But this again,
for
it's not so much a David Lynch
Yeah.
film. It is and it isn't. It's all over. the
for
place.
people who aren't aware, why don't you tell everyone who Jodorowsky had in mind for the Baron?
Oh, yes, indeed. So I watched Jodorowsky's Dune the other day, which is it's simply a treat to see this crazy Spanish man talk about his wild dreams of a Dune that, people say this would have been a great movie if it was made. And I don't know about that. It certainly would be
Interesting.
infamous and I think it wouldn't be too much different than the David Lynch Dune in that it's kind of
Just
like
longer.
a cultural,
Yeah.
an interesting cultural archival element thing, but it's not much of a good movie to return to. So Jodorowsky had good old
Orson Welles. Yeah, I say, I don't want to do it. I said, if you do the picture, I will hire the chef of the restaurant and you will eat as here every day. And I say, I do it.
cast. He bribed Orson Welles with a personal chef on set to get Orson Welles back on the film. He had Salvador Dali for the Emperor of the Galaxy.
It was so weird.
They had Mick Jagger for someone. It's like the ultimate ad lib filmmaking casting. That's what
The spice. There's my impression of Baron Wells.
The French champagne.
I would love to see that though. That is a tragedy that we ultimately lost that.
Yeah,
But
it's like
you know.
a Magnificent Amberson's Wells cut number 2, Wells is Baron number 1.
And Jodorowsky actually cast his son, who was quite young at the time, as Paul.
Weird. As Paul. Weird.
And I think I'm not sure how I'm going to feel about Timothée Chalamet as Paul. It is what it is. I'm going to see what kind of performance he gives, and that's it. Whatever. I personally think Dune should have a younger Paul, not not Jodorowsky's like 12-year-old Paul, and not the 25-year-old. Actually, interesting. Timothy Chalamet and Kyle MacLachlan are the same age when they're in the 1984 version, and here, yeah.
Wow.
They don't necessarily look the same. Kyle looks older.
No.
Yeah.
Paul. Well,
they're
Timothy
both
is always
25,
very young.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm not a Timothy fan, so we'll see.
No, I think like an 18-year-old Paul makes more sense. I don't know, someone who's it's like
Tom
more of a,
Holland
it's,
Paul.
Yeah, it's more of a coming of age story, and
Yeah,
Timothy Chalamet's already come of age.
He still looks 18 to me.
Yeah, he looks fine for the role.
Yeah.
So that's a saving grace.
Yeah, I honestly think the biggest issue, well, one of the biggest issues is just how miscast the Duke is, and I do think that regardless, like just off the bat immediately, I think Oscar Isaac is going to be much more interesting. Just because I think he's an eminently likable man, likable actor, and that's not my bias. He's an asshole in Inside Llewyn Davis.
No, it could be your bias, but it could also be right.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah. I don't know what else to say about Dune. Again, the only comparable thing I can think of is the prequels, just because there's so many lessons on how not to make a movie in so many different ways. And I just find it interesting that he went from this immediately into what I think is one of the best movies of all time. And I'm also interested in just how many of his regular people that were in this movie he took for better stuff down the road. Also, it's worth it alone just to see Jack Nance in this movie for some fucking reason.
Yeah.
I do love that he gets gigs.
I'm going to say this is a movie I recommend, despite everything that I've said in this review. Because it is fun. I think it's a good lesson. I think it is ultimately you thought it was boring, but I think it's entertaining, at least on a first watch. And not necessarily entertaining all the way through, but it's not like this is a grog. You want to get to the end. You want to see how it's completed. You want to see the train wreck in its full glory. And then once you've seen it, it's good to know.
I would be fascinated to hear someone's opinion of this who has never read the book. Because again, I could vaguely follow the story because I was familiar with the source material, but then I just think to myself, what does the average person think when an hour and 20 minutes into the movie they say Muad'Dib every other word?
What do you call the mouse shadow in the second moon?
We call that one Muad'Dib.
Muad'Dib.
I would love to see the average person who has never read the book try to name more than 3 characters.
Another great moment from the movie that had me laughing was at the end during the battle. The Emperor of the Galaxy gets on one of the little turrets and is playing a little game, and he looks like a senile old man trying to shoot. I
love when the soldiers are on those turrets and they're in like those little submarine things where you look through the visors and then you see what they're looking through, and it's like a fucking lit up iron grate or something that you very clearly would not be able to see anything through. And at the end, I don't know why the fuck they shot this, but like Sean Young is like firing at the base, but it's very clear that she's on like a green screen and everything behind her is fake. And I swear, like, there's a scene where she's just firing her gun and shouting Muad'Dib for some reason. It's just so dumb.
Yeah. There's.
I'm glad I didn't buy the arrow set. I'm sure you've had fun with it, but it's a nice looking arrow.
So I have it here. It's so nice. It's not one of those things where like I'm sad that the movie isn't better. It's just like this is such a quality set in and of itself that I can't complain at all. It's just so nice.
I'm assuming the actual thing didn't have Jodorowsky's Dune on it.
No, it did not.
That'd be interesting.
It would have been nice.
Yeah,
would have been nice, but no.
But I guess my final question is there any element to this movie that feels distinctly Lynchian? Because not a lot of it feels.
There's I think the Spice Guild navigators and some of the baby imagery near the end. I think that's very, very Lynchian. You did say the dreams were, and obviously Lynch is more that, but I think the dreams were still more, sure, they were interesting, visually interesting, and maybe a bit more interestingly edited than the rest of the film, but they still made no fucking sense.
No,
they still did nothing good for the movie. But there was a couple, like the things that felt really Lynchian were like the really like gross stuff that he fixated on, and in the design, a lot of the Harkonnen stuff felt like David Lynch got really excited about that.
Yeah,
which
the Baron
comes across
could fit right at home in Eraserhead.
Good.
And turn it round real neat.
I think the grossest thing to me is that the Mentats, why do they all have like cold sores? It makes no sense.
Why does everyone look like they're about to die of cancer?
I like that all the Harkonnens are like ginger for some reason. It's kind of funny.
Yeah.
It's just oddly designed movie.
Yeah. So
classic. It's on Hulu if anyone wants to watch it.
Oh,
yeah.
Interesting.
I wouldn't know because I rented it on YouTube.
So yeah, I guess for the new Dune, I'm very excited to see how it stacks up to this. There's obviously, I think, next to zero chance that it is worse than this. I think it's going to be a clear improvement. How much of an improvement?
I fucking hope so.
We'll see.
Yeah.
And obviously, I'm most curious to see how the exposition is going to be handled, and want to make sure that the characters that aren't with us for too long are given proper characters. We are invested in everyone, not just Paul and the Harkonnens.
Yeah. Even just from the little clips that I've seen, I can already tell Momoa is going to be a much better Duncan.
It's going to be fun.
Yeah.
Just be fun at the very least. And that's what the character, like, you don't have to have these deep characters, just someone who's, in giving an interesting performance. Yes, and no one really was in this movie.
No.
Except for
the
Harkonnens.
Literally only the Harkonnens. And I do love, I always forget his name. He's Worm Tongue.
Brad Dourif.
Yes. I love Brad Dourif.
With his
big fan.
Giant eyebrows in this film, which is the exact opposite because he has no eyebrows in Lord of the Rings.
It's funny. I feel like this was a sort of prototypical Worm Tongue character. Similar in a lot of ways. Not as good looking as Worm.
I forgot where, I know in the behind the scenes features for Lord of the Rings, Peter Jackson talks about how he knows Brad Dourif. I forgot if he mentioned Dune or not. So I'd be curious to see if that was one of them.
3 or One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. He's in a lot of stuff.
Interesting. So I think that's it. Dune, it's not good, but it is fun. It is interesting.
It's interesting.
It is aesthetically interesting.
It is.
I don't know. I could say more, but it's Dune. I like Dune, and whatever it is, I'm very excited for the new one. We're obviously going to talk about the new one quite soon, and that will be up on the channel. I'm going to get this episode up as soon as possible, whatever that means. I don't know myself. Keep an eye out for it. Obviously, if you've gotten this far in the review, you've already kept an eye out for it and have watched it. Thank you. Yeah, and do the like, comment, and subscribe thing if you do.
The bell.
If you did like it,
hit that bell.
Let us know your own thoughts of David Lynch's Dune.
I'm excited. I can finally update my David Lynch movies ranked list.
Oh, that's right. Where does this go?
It's the bottom.
Yeah, as I thought. All right. Thanks for watching.